It's a wonderful pleasure to welcome Katy Topham to this program. She is a country musician from Ontario. How are you today, Katy? Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Chong. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's been a lovely afternoon in Budapest, Hungary. I wonder if you visit.
I've never been, no.
hmm Yeah, it's a lovely town, and it's in the middle of Europe. So if you have a chance to.
I would love to. I love traveling. I think the furthest and most interesting place I've been was Indonesia, which
hmm
was a really wonderful trip that I did for 10 days. And but no, Budapest would be a very interesting place to go.
hmm Yeah, what brought you to Indonesia?
A wedding, actually. My now husband's best friend at the time had us both in the wedding. I performed in their wedding ceremony, and my husband was the best man, or one of them. Yeah, so we flew out to Indonesia to be part of the wedding and spent 10 days there.
hmm So,
Yeah.
did you know the man who would be your husband beforehand?
I did. Yes, we
Okay.
were dating at the time, and we actually got engaged while we were there.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was an exciting trip.
hmm So, how long have you been married?
Oh, so this year would have been 5 years in June. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Did you do anything special for the anniversary?
Well, so our anniversary was actually 2 days after my daughter was born. So the day of our anniversary was the day I got to bring her home because I had a C-section. So I was in the hospital for 2 days. So we didn't do very much that day, but we did bring our daughter home that day. So it was very special in that sense.
Yeah, and congratulations on your newborn daughter.
Thank you. She's pretty great.
hmm what's her name?
Zeta.
Zeta, as in
Mhm.
Catherine Zeta Jones.
Yes, actually, yeah.
Mhm.
Not named after her, but spelt the same way. Yes. Yeah, it's Greek. My son's name is Zenon, and my husband wanted something just as interesting as his name, so he found the name Zeta, and yeah, it's we really liked it.
Wonderful. Yeah. So, what's it like caring for I'm guessing 3-month old?
Yeah, so she's 3 months, and my son is 3.5 years.
Mhm.
So it's a lot. Uh, but it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy looking at the world through the eyes of my kids. It's been really refreshing for me as a human being. I really enjoy parenting.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm.
So tell me more about that. How is it different looking at the world through the eyes of children?
Well, I mean, I think that I've always been so focused on the next thing, and that's probably part of what makes me a good self-employed person is, I always want to hit my next goal. I want to be a better musician, be a better guitar player, play more gigs, write more songs, all that kind of stuff. And I know that there's anything wrong with, the grind to a certain degree. Um, but I often have a hard time slowing down and just appreciating the moment. And it's hard not to slow down and appreciate the moment when you have kids because everything takes so long. It's you go on a walk, and my 3-year-old is obsessed with, a specific tree or rock for 25 minutes. You don't just walk, you observe things, you talk about small things that maybe as an adult you would have thought of as insignificant. And now I pay more attention to those things. I taught my son all about mushrooms and fungus while we were in the forest the other day, and we were there for 2 hours. Another thing too is my son actually has autism,
Mhm.
and so it's been incredibly fascinating watching the things that he finds fascinating. He's incredibly intelligent, and he's just got a very interesting way of looking at things. And now having another baby, she just everything makes her smile, and I think we could probably learn something from that just in and of itself.
Mhm. If you don't mind delving more into your son, when did you discover that he's on the spectrum, so to speak?
So he was diagnosed, and actually this will really be the first time I'm kind of publicly talking about it, to be honest.
Okay.
He was diagnosed just this past year, so last year, and we started seeking speech therapy around 1 year old, be 1 years old, because he was, well, maybe 1.5, because he just kind of, he wasn't really saying much, and it seemed like he probably should. He was missing a couple speech milestones specifically. And so yeah, after going to, there's something called Kids Ability here in our area, and it's just a, yeah, a program that helps, kids that are on the spectrum specifically, and kids with learning disabilities in general. And yeah, they suggested we talk to our pediatrician, and gave us a diagnosis, and now he does like different occupational therapy groups and activities with other kids, and honestly, he's absolutely thriving.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. I think I've mentioned this once or twice in my show. It's not something that I like to mention, but I'm on the spectrum as well. It's
Very cool.
Asperger's. So I guess it's a milder form than what little Zen is experiencing. But I did wish that my parents would have had like early intervention during childhood, because I think I didn't remember having a rough childhood, but I remember having a
Mhm.
very rough adolescent, because the
Fair enough.
landscape changed. And I certainly hope that when he reaches the adolescent age, he wouldn't have gone through such things.
I hope so too. My husband, for example, he's got ADHD, and as do I. I actually wouldn't be surprised if I'm on the spectrum. However, an assessment for an adult trying to seek that out is pretty expensive. So that's not something that I've sought out to do for myself yet. However, I will say that my goal specifically for my son, because they ask me that often, what's your goal? What's your goal? And honestly, my goal is for him just to thrive and be happy in whatever it is he wants to do. So really any kind of therapies or groups that we go to, what I'm striving for is to help him communicate in whatever way that looks like for him. He does talk quite a lot now. But he also does use a lot of hand gestures, and uses his body movement. He's incredibly independent, and I think that probably started because he didn't know how to ask for things, right? So my goal honestly is just to help him be understood by other people so that he doesn't struggle that way in adolescence, so he knows how to present himself as who he really is, so that he's not masking, because I don't think anybody should have to do that.
Yeah, I tried doing that and it was horrible.
Yeah, it's not fun, eh?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So leading up to your latest single, so
Ooh.
to what extent do you find it difficult to open up about your mental health struggles?
Mm. To be honest with you, I've always been a pretty open person. I guess you could say I've got verbal diarrhea to a certain degree. But and that maybe that's a trauma response, the amount that I share. Who knows? But this one was like this latest single, I don't even know her. That one was harder to share than a lot of other things I have. Because it was kind of admitting that I was weak, really. Like it was me describing an incredibly weak place that I was in, and that was really hard for me. However, now that I've done it, I feel really strong. I've gotten a lot of messages from people saying that it really spoke to them and it was really helpful for them. A friend of mine messaged me recently to tell me that they've decided to stop drinking, and that was slightly influenced by me in a conversation we had, and yeah, it's all felt really good. It was scary, but I really am enjoying the result. I'm happy I did it.
Mhm. Yeah, and the song presents a very interesting dichotomy, and that being that you are not yourself when you are this and this and that. And it reminds me of that Snickers commercial tagline. You're not you when you're
That's probably all I needed.
hungry. But yeah, it's I guess the song does mirror your personal experiences in some way. So tell me more about this dissociation that you have during that particularly difficult period of time?
Yeah, so the dissociation is, or the dissociation has been in the song is described kind of in a couple different ways. The first way I describe it is kind of how when you drink too much, you forget the way you behave, right? And that's always been a really big problem for me is my drinking. And I haven't drank in a couple years now. That's something that after my before my son was born, I stopped drinking for quite some time. After my son was born, I had a couple drinks here and there, but ultimately, I decided about a year and a half ago to just not ever have any more drinks because it's just not something that's good for me. And one of the things that'll happen is honestly, I get angry when I drink. I'm not very nice, and I that probably comes from a deeper place. But I don't like who I am when I drink, and that's kind of who I'm describing in the first part of the song, is this person who can be incredibly unkind, and I don't really know who that is because I'm not an unkind person. And then in another breath, the song describes a dissociative moment with my mental health, and this was where it was really hard for me to share, is that was me admitting that I have had episodes like that. And when I say episodes like that, I guess what I mean is I've gotten so frustrated, angry, upset that everything kind of goes white and I don't act like myself anymore. I act in my purest form of fight or flight mode. And when it's all over, I'm absolutely exhausted. My body hurts, my brain hurts, and sometimes I don't remember all the things that I said. And admitting that I've had many times that's happened to me was difficult. But it feels kind of freeing now that I shared that. But yeah, that's what those episodes look like. And thankfully, I have my husband, who is my best friend, who helps me through those times. And I haven't had an episode like that in quite some time.
Okay, I'm very glad to hear it.
Yes.
I wonder if there are organizations such as the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous in Canada that helps you go through this, get through this particular problem that you have.
Yeah, there are. So I've done all different kinds of, therapy groups, stuff like that. Um, right now I'm kind of in a space where I'm utilizing all of the knowledge that I have of what helps me personally and just trying to live my life in a routine that makes me happy and calm. However, talking about AA, I did go to AA for quite some time. Um, I'm not a I'm not a Christian. I grew up Christian. I'm not anymore. I don't consider myself a Christian any longer. So the God aspect of AA is sometimes a little hard for me to get past. So it's not something that I frequent unless I'm feeling like I really need to be there, like I'm really struggling and need to talk to someone. However, there are all different kinds of organizations in my area, and I actually, after I released the song, came out with these little stickers that have a QR code on them that'll take you to a web page, and you can actually find it in my link tree on my Instagram, and it says mental health resources, and it'll take you to an entire link tree that I made. Actually, I think it's campsite bio or something. Anyway, and it's got all the different organizations that I've utilized in the area that you can utilize for mental health and addiction services. So yeah, I know all about all of those places in the area. And I actually recently played a show called Country Talks Mental Health, where we raised a bunch of money for an organization just like that in Toronto.
I see. So, given the title of my show, allow me to inject a bit of philosophy in it. I find it interesting that
Let's do it.
musicians are not philosophers, even though they are philosophical musicians, and musicians tend to touch on a certain aspect of philosophy. And for you, I think about people like Saint Augustine. I believe one of the 12 steps in Alcoholics Anonymous is that accepting that you cannot will your way out of your alcoholic addiction, and you require a God for help.
Hmm.
And for Saint Augustine, in his
Yep.
wonderful book, The Confessions, he he talks a lot about how he himself was a kind of lost soul, both intellectually and spiritually. He he mentioned that his mom desperately wanted him to convert to the Christian religion, but he he didn't do that, and instead he was overcome with lust. Basically, he had a very interesting erotic life, and he also had a very interesting intellectual life too. He pursued a great many disciplines. One could say intellectual fads of that time before he finally settled on the spiritual and intellectual and moral life of the church. And one of the ideas that he categorically rejects is this view that you can will your own salvation um, by doing what you deem to be necessary in order to be closer to God. And that view is known as Pelagianism, after the prophet and now heretic Pelagius. And the rejection of Pelagianism is Augustine's way of adding God into one's life and thus removing a sense of hubris from one's life. And no matter how, no matter if you're a non-believer or a believer, it is it is true to accept that once you are in the grips of an addiction, you cannot get out of it by yourself, and you require external help. And I wonder if you can add more to it.
So I would agree with that, honestly. I so the what you were touching on before is actually it's the mantra of AA is the Serenity Prayer, which is God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Um, and this has always been a funny one for me. Is are we? I think we're kind of touching on the same thing when I say are we in the grips of fate and what is going to happen, or can we change things and can we do that on our own? And I don't know, I kind of sit somewhere in the middle. um but I do think that you have to give yourself up to a certain degree to be able to let go of these things, because addiction is, it's not a choice. It's 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 a disease. And so whether you choose to put your faith in God or in some kind of higher power. Me, for example, I am very I believe in the in different pagan rituals and stuff like that. Being close to the earth is what makes sense to me. So that I don't necessarily believe that there's some guy with a big white beard hanging out looking out for me. But do I believe that I have do I believe I see my grandpa when chickadees come into my yard? Yes, I do. Do I see my grandma when I see a blue jay? Yes, I do. And so I believe all those people are, if you need to give yourself up to one of those people who you remember, then that works too. If you want to give yourself up to the universe, then that works too. If giving yourself up to therapy is what works, then that's good too. I don't think it necessarily has to be God, but I think that you have to kind of let go of your own control of the situation, at least in the moment where you're struggling. Um, when I spent some time in the hospital when I was quitting drugs, which was something I've been clean for almost 8 years, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without some kind of belief that I was going to be okay. And it was definitely an abstract belief. I didn't know that, and I didn't know how I was going to change that myself. All I knew was that with some kind of external, abstract, and what felt like insane belief existing, that I could come out on the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. Um, so I wonder if reflecting on your past trauma, so to speak, there are definitely experiences that you would reflect upon and you would not be too proud of it. And I think we all have those experiences. And I wonder, how do you come to terms with those?
Mhm. Some of them, well, yeah, I'm disappointed in myself for some of the decisions that I've made and the behaviors I've exhibited over the years, especially when I was doing drugs. I was selfish, inconsiderate, mean sometimes. All of those typical things you are when you're in the grips of addiction. Sometimes I still get mad at myself for those things. Sometimes I still find it hard on a bad day to say to myself that I still feel like I'm a good person, regardless of the choices that I've made. But honestly, the way that I've come to terms with those things as a whole in general is because of the way my life has turned out. The fact that I am healthy, that I have two healthy children, that I'm able to maintain my career and my home life, that I have a partner who's my best friend. I don't feel like I would have been able to accomplish those things if I wasn't some form of a good person. My husband believes I'm a good person and loves me. My kids believe I'm a good person and they love me. And that's how I know that those things didn't make me a bad person. They were just choices that I happened to make.
Yeah, and I think in the Christian religion, and I say this as a Christian myself, I'm a convert to Catholicism, the same as Augustine. It's been for a year now, and I I think the in what's so striking about Christianity for me is that there's not a very striking distinction between good and bad people. I know that many Christians of, I guess, what do you call it, fundamentalist stripes make that distinction between good and evil. But uh, for for the
Yep.
for the, I guess, nominal, so to speak, Christian belief, there are good and bad acts. But for people, the even if you're doing these good and bad acts, you're still like you're still what do you call it, blessed with God's grace, and that is something that you did not ask for, and to be honest, you cannot really refuse either. And it is something that you do not have to work for,
Mhm.
nor do you really have to work for, and that's something that Augustine invokes in his great work, the Confessions, too. And even though you may not be a Christian believer, you do believe in this notion of love being given without condition, and I believe it is that notion of love being given without condition that that keeps people uh, in the straight and narrow path, so to speak. Yeah, I wonder if you can talk about that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, I grew up Christian. I went to school. I went to Catholic school. I was baptized. I was actually baptized Lutheran, confirmed Catholic.
Mhm.
Did my oh, what is that? Your first communion, all that kind of stuff. And then as I got older, I actually found religion. I've always found religion very fascinating. I went to university at Wilfrid Laurier, and I was majoring in English and minoring in religion, and I was actually planning on teaching. Was the goal. And the more I learned about the Catholic religion specifically, the more I realized it wasn't where I wanted to be. Um, and I would consider myself a pantheist. That would probably be the most accurate description of what I believe, which essentially is broadly defined. It's that God is everything and everything is God. Like the world is either identical with him or is expressed through nature as him, if that makes any sense. And that's why different pagan rituals and like witchy beliefs all make a lot of sense to me. I would often I've often referred to myself as a witch, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, in in trying to get back to answering your question, I do believe that at the end of the day that really is the goal, is giving love without condition and being able to, I guess, behave as though we would assume God would behave. Does like I mean I would choose to believe that if there is a God, that it's just some abundance. He's an abundance of maybe not he, they are an abundance of love, you know, they of unconditional love. And I don't think that any kind of I don't believe in the concept of an angry, vengeful God. I just don't. That doesn't make any sense to me. And that's why that's why my beliefs have kind of strayed and gone into something different. But I do believe that unconditional love is kind of the basis of it's the basis of most religions, I think. And yeah, I think that that's something that probably everybody could agree on.
Mhm.
I would
Yeah.
hope that would be nice.
I think every one of us would like to be loved unconditionally. I think that's the idea that I found, well, both in myself and in listening to others in my show and in other mediums such as real life. And and I think we often find ourselves disappointed when others when people that we know, maybe even love, starts disappointing us in ways that we couldn't fathom, and we believe as if there were certain preconditions for their affections of us. And I've certainly felt that way throughout my life, and it can be tough.
I would agree with that.
Mhm. Yeah. So does music help with when you were going through your uh struggles with addiction, and of course even now?
Yes. The reason I had hesitated is I stopped performing for a while because I was often I was doing drugs and drinking too much before I'd play, and that became hard with being in bars all the time became an issue. So I did stop performing for a while, but I never stopped writing, and I never stopped playing for myself. And that part of it really helped me a lot. It helped me to remember that I had a story to share. It helped me to remember that even when I was in a really bad place, music still made me feel good. Um, and and I definitely believe there's something to be said for music as a healing tool, for like music and sound as as literally a medical healing tool. I think that that's there's some really amazing research on that subject, and I really do believe that there's something about being able to play music as well. It's definitely cathartic for me in the sense that I can, if I don't have somebody to talk to or I don't feel like I can explain my feelings, I can explain them a little more abstractly in lyrics, and being able to sing them makes me physically feel better as well. I mean, if you want to get into the science behind it, any kind of humming and singing is going to stimulate your vagus nerves, which are going to help with your depression and yada yada. But spiritually speaking, too, just being able to write those things down in the process and share my feelings out loud, even if it was to no one, even if it was just in my office, was incredibly helpful for me. And it still is to this day.
Mhm. Yeah, I think a central problem in the school that is known as continental philosophy, which is the school of thought that is launched in Germany and France during the 20th century, is that um, language itself is inadequate as a tool of communication because it does not cover all expressions. And you can see it
Right.
too in that there are certain languages where certain modes of expression and certain terms are defined, where in other languages you do not have it. Like, for example,
Mhm.
I speak two languages thus far, and I'm learning a
Okay.
few more, English and my native tongue, Vietnamese. And I find that
Mhm.
in English, there are words that the Vietnamese language do not have, and Vietnamese has to loan plenty of words from the English language. And as I learn certain languages like German or Hungarian, I find that they have words that English do not have. For example, what is the English equivalent for Schadenfreude? And but thus far, what I find is that music, in addition to being the universal language, in that you don't have to speak the same language to enjoy the same music, it can also be a key to expressing certain states and certain objects that ordinary language cannot express.
I totally agree. Um, I, first of all, yes, the fact that there are different phrases in different languages that like mean something so complex is fascinating to me, because I agree. I don't find English is like that. Not in the same way anyway. Especially like you said, there are certain German phrases. I've often found like in there's certain Japanese phrases that are like that as well. Anyway, just things that I've experienced or have learned about. Um, but yeah, music is fascinating that way. I like all kinds of different music, and it always depends on my mood, what it is that I'm listening to. And and I do think that that's a really interesting concept, that you can kind of portray a feeling through music. A really fascinating culture. If you look at the Native Canadian people, if you look at all the Indigenous people, who their music and the way that they communicate with each other and communicate their feelings, and how they have different drum sounds for different occasions and things like that. Their music is absolutely beautiful and so deeply meaningful. And I think that's a really good example of how music can portray feeling. And I've been lucky enough to witness different drum circles and stuff like that that have happened in our area because of the different demonstrations and the different and the community that we have of Indigenous people in this area. And it's been wonderful to see and experience over the past couple of years.
So tell me about your musical schedule. How do you balance between that and family life?
Oh boy. I do my best. Right now, honestly, I'm slowing down again. Um, and that's something that I haven't really been super vocal about yet, and I am probably going to say something on my social media about it. Um, my kids are only going to be this age for so long, and music is always going to be there for me in one form of another. It doesn't mean I'm stopping. I just Whereas I used to play as much as possible, like this October, I'm playing every single weekend, because I got booked. I don't want to do that anymore. I love playing, but I think I'm gonna save my endless amounts of performing for the summertime. Right now, I'm choosing to take gigs. As of November, I'm going to be taking things that just mean a lot to me. So I'm probably going to be playing more like 2 gigs a month rather than, 10. Um, and I think I'm going to spend some time doing some more writing by myself is a big goal that I have this year, is that I do a lot of co-writing. But recently I wrote a song that I would say I wrote 98% myself and had somebody kind of finish up with me. And I am really excited about it. So my music schedule is going to be a lot more um, of me just finding time to sit by myself in my office and work on things, and trying to spend as much time as I can with my kids. And a big part of that too is helping my son navigate his different classes and therapies that he has to go to make sure he's thriving and as happy as possible. So that's kind of how I'm balancing things right now, as I'm putting my family first. And even when I work a lot, that always is the case. I fit things in where they make sense for my family. Where there's other people on deck if, my husband needs help with 2 kids. It's different that there's two now. It's a lot more. The other thing is too is I bring my family to a lot of stuff. We have a trailer, so this summer I did a couple different performances and just brought everybody with me. But honestly, yeah, finding a balance has been weird. We have a routine, but it falls off every once in a while because being a musician is never the same. But luckily, my kids roll with it and they're pretty good with it, and they both really like music. So, I guess to answer your question, I balance it as much as I can by taking breaks, and doing things that feel good to me rather than stressing myself out.
So, what is your current favorite family activity?
Honestly, walks, especially this time of year with the weather the way it is. It's getting a little cooler, so you can walk further without getting dehydrated or too hot. And there's at the beginning of the pandemic, when I couldn't work and I was pregnant with my son, I taught myself all about foraging. So I know a lot about the different plants in our area that are edible, things that aren't, just different weird little tidbits of information about plants that grow in Ontario. So one of my favorite things is to take my kids out and just teach them about stuff like that. Obviously, the baby's a little young, but my son was very excited to learn things about fungus the other day. It was a very exciting word to learn. And yeah, so yeah, I'd say walks are probably my favorite family activity currently.
Hmm. Yeah, and going back to the beginning of our conversation, I understand that people who have ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, have a harder time than most to slow things down, to do something without being distracted. So I wonder, how do you manage to improve upon that skill set?
I'm still working on it in my 30s. I mean, I was only diagnosed with ADHD last year. I honestly only started looking into me being a neurodivergent human with the emergence of TikTok
Mhm.
and learning. And honestly, TikTok is, I know people knock TikTok all the time, but I do my research and I talk to my doctors, but it has brought up some really relevant information for me. One of them being the foraging stuff, and the other one being the neurodivergency thing. But honestly, after I started looking into my son being neurodivergent and watching the way my husband functions, and him being a male, he of course got diagnosed when he was a kid. So I'm only kind of learning that this is what it is I'm experiencing. And now kind of going, okay, what tools make sense for me to manage this? Because seriously, I still do all my work at the last minute. I'm very bad at procrastinating and I get incredibly distracted. But for me, one of my biggest things is I need to be by myself. If I'm going to get any kind of work done, I need to be alone. So I have an office and the door shuts and locks, and this is where I need to be if I get anything done. If I can't work on my computer in my bed or in the living room or anywhere but my office, because I will get it done in probably 8 times the amount of time it should be done because the TV's on and the kids are talking to me. Another thing for me is earplugs. Uh, I wear loop earplugs. I'm really upset because I'm waiting on a shipment and it's taken almost a month. But earplugs are really important for me. Extra noise is a lot for me and makes it really hard for me to focus. I'm not a listen to music and work kind of person. Otherwise, I'll start typing out the music I'm listening to rather than what I'm thinking. So yeah, no, earplugs and being by myself. Those are the ways I work best.
Mhm.
But I also do find that being a musician and having ADHD is kind of cool because sometimes, I'll be out and about and I'll get distracted by something really interesting and it'll spark a song idea. I think it definitely, the distractions and the ADHD and the fidgeting that I clearly, as you can see, do constantly, does help my creativity as well. So,
Mhm. I've read a lot about the rise of people who are diagnosed with ADHD and autism. And
mhm.
if you're in a more conspiratorial mindset, you would say that, oh, that's vaccines that's doing it. Right now, I know that one of the Kennedys is doing that, but there is some validity in saying that modern society is doing some part in perhaps not causing autism or ADHD, but certainly exacerbating behaviors and symptoms to those who already have it. In that we are we live filled with distractions, especially if we live in cities. And
Yep.
I find I've had the hardest time finding practices like meditation work for me because I just cannot do that. But what I but what really helps me is again returns to the continental philosophers like Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger, in that they are getting to that problem, and they were writing in the early 20th century where concepts like ADHD and autism were not as common as they were, but
Mhm.
they were getting at the problem of how humans live in a world that's filled with distraction, and it can be filled by technology and other similar things. But what they believe is that the goal of philosophy is should be to examine the self, because Socrates says that the unexamined life is not living, and they are worried too much about how we've come to be too fixated on externalities, and we've developed a full and complete language system in order to describe the external world, namely, say, natural and modern science. But we do not have a coherent language to describe what's going on within, not just in the mind, but in your entire being as a whole. And those two, they certainly do not believe that psychology works, because psychology is actually applying the language of the external world, modern natural science, into the mind. But of course, to the extent that they succeeded in developing this new language, they call it phenomenology, is disputed.
Okay.
There's no there's no dispute in saying that what they are attempting is laudable.
So there's a lot of things I want to respond to. Um, First of all, I mean, like, I know that this isn't what we're talking about. Yeah, no, vaccines, obviously, I completely disagree with the concept that vaccines cause any kind of ADHD, autism, anything like that. I am of the team that it's genetics. I could go on for a while, but it would be too much. With the concept of genetics plus epigenetics and how they affect our children. Um, but oh, sorry, said a lot of things. Um, I think that I definitely think that our world is an uncomfortable place. Um, this whole concept of the grind is terrifying to a lot of people. And I do think that it exacerbates a lot of issues in neurodivergent people. It's hard for me, for example, to keep up with, like, as a musician, I have to have all of these different like social medias, and I'm supposed to make TikToks and all this kind of crazy stuff because my job isn't just about making music anymore. It's about like all these million other things and marketing and the way, and like luckily I went to school for marketing, but God, it changes all the time. The amount of technology that we're required or expected to use it's a lot, and it's going to overwhelm anybody. And I think it was, what was it? I read an article once about just the concept of the constant flipping through things and not focusing on something for more than 2 seconds at a time. That's also causing issues with people. However, I will say my son, for example, my son has autism, and he uses his tablet quite often. And I have had mixed opinions from people saying, screens aren't good for kids, blah, 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 blah. And that's fine. You can feel how you want to about it. I find that it's a way for my son to decompress. It helps him regulate. And he has a lot of really fun and intelligent and games that allow him to use his brain and work really hard on his iPad. And it's part of the reason that his language has excelled. So on the one hand, I do believe that technology and stuff like that has been helpful for people with neurodivergencies. Um, Another thing, for example, is I rely on my Apple Watch. I have every single thing in my life in my phone and my calendar, and it's synced to my Apple Watch. All my products are Apple products because they all talk to each other, and it's the only way that I don't forget things. So in that sense, I would say that our new world is kind of helpful, but I would agree. I'm the kind of person who, my kids aren't going to have cell phones until they're quite a bit older. I'm going to limit internet use and stuff like that in my house. It's the internet's a scary place and it stresses people out. Um, and we could dive into that, but that's a whole nother thing. Um, what was the other thing I was going to address? We were talking about society and the way it's affected everybody. Oh, so then the concept of the rise in people who are neurodivergent. So that I find really fascinating. I think there's a lot of different things to be said about that. On the one hand, I think that it's not that there's more people who are experiencing being on the spectrum, having ADHD, being neurodivergent. I think it's that for a really long time, the typical, like, let's talk about ADHD for a second. The typical example of a child with ADHD was a young boy who didn't listen or ever sit still and got in trouble a lot, right? And so often females specifically, tend to present differently with their ADHD symptoms. I, for example, am hyperlexic. I read at a really young age. I read really incredibly fast, and I was always on the honor roll at school. So for me, why would I get diagnosed with ADHD? And so it looks different for different people. So now with the emergence of, I would say TikTok is the biggest one. With people posting videos about their experiences getting diagnosed. I think that that's actually just helped people come to terms with the fact that the things that they were experiencing actually is neurodivergency. So it's just giving people access to different experiences so that they can see themselves mirrored in other people. Same goes for being able to diagnose your kids on the spectrum. There's a lot of different, I have mixed feelings about people who post, their kids' tantrums on the spectrum and stuff like that. And I don't post a lot or talk a lot about my son having autism online because that's his business, not mine. But some of those accounts, of moms who have said, this is what I found my child was going through, and this is what helped, and this is how we got a diagnosis, and this is what led me to believe that my child was on the spectrum and I was right. I think that's another thing that has really influenced parents to take their kids to speech therapy, to have their kids see a pediatrician, stuff like that. Um, if you really want to get into an interesting theory, and I'm not going to go too far into it because, first of all, I don't know too much about it. And second of all, it's a lot of information. Recently, I came across a video, and I don't know, again, I don't know much about this, but someone had said that at different points in history where there have been very large events. So, for example, recently COVID and how that changed the world, the world wars, stuff like that. There tends to be an emergence. Again, I don't know how true this is, but there are examples of emergence of large groups of people being neurodivergent or being diagnosed neurodivergent around that same time. And the theory is that it's because we need people who think differently to help our worlds do better. So that was a really interesting theory I came across, and I have no idea how much truth there is to that, but I just thought that was a fascinating concept, and I'd like to look into that further. But anyway, that's what I have to say about all the things you just said.
Well, thank you for your contribution. Again, going back to the realm of conspiracy theory, and I certainly
Yeah.
think that someone like, again, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. believes that there's this weird collusion between the psychological profession and the pharmacological industry, in that the psychologists would make up these diagnoses, and the pharmacological companies would provide the drugs for it. So think of
Right.
examples like it's ADHD invented for Ritalin or something
Yeah.
like that. But
Yep.
nevertheless, I certainly believe that he's getting at something, in that we have a very pharmaceutical centric approach to treating mental health, which refers to what I said about how the we use the language of the external world to describe the internal world, and that I think that's incompatible. So, and this can have profound effects on children, obviously. And I wonder, what are some of the non pharmaceutical way to help your child, little Zen, uh, go through his day-to-day life?
Well, I think so I'll touch on your I'll touch on your comment about the pharmaceutical thing, just in general first, is that I totally agree. I think that we reach for a pharmaceutical option quicker than we do anything else because in the Western world we've been conditioned to believe that our doctors are always right, right? Like I still remember the time I realized that my doctor wasn't like Dr. House on TV. He wasn't spending all of his time researching all my symptoms and blah blah. Those 8 minutes were the only time that my doctor ever thought about me. And so, and I really started advocating for my own health after becoming a parent, because I realized how little I knew about my body and the way it worked when I had kids. And so, it's I do think that medication is important. I take medication, but I also do think that a lot of pharmaceuticals are a band-aid. Now, are band-aids important to make sure you don't bleed to death? Absolutely. So, I mean, those are important things. However, there are a lot of other alternatives. Like I see a naturopath. I have a lot of, alternative beliefs in terms of health. So anyway, that's just my comment on that. I think there's all kinds of things you can do for mental health, but sometimes medication is good. I don't know. Would I ever put my son on medication? right now, absolutely not. I don't think that that's necessary. My kid just thinks differently, and so for him, routine is a huge thing. Um, Knowing what to expect, so having conversations with him and being honest with him, and just spending time with him and learning what his expectations are and what makes him happy and what makes him sad, what makes him upset, just the knowledge that he doesn't like doing things at the very last minute, and he'd like it if I bring it up a couple times before we go do something. That totally will change his attitude towards something, right? So just really for my son, and honestly I think for most kids, I think the biggest thing is just listening and kind of learning how they experience the world so that you can better help them through their day. And that's not, a question of medication at all. It's even remotely. It's just learning about your child. And that's what helps him the most, is that I know him really well.
Mhm. Yeah, and yeah, I can certainly understand the feeling of having a last minute plan being thrown at you. That
Yeah, right.
becomes the worst.
Well, and I think that's an interesting thing, is that a lot of people don't see the way they talk to children and the way they expect them to do things. If you were expected as an adult to drop everything you were in the middle of and just, hey, we're leaving, we're going right now. I know I didn't tell you we were doing anything today, but we're going, we're doing it right now. Wouldn't that piss you off? And I think that's the biggest thing, is kind of sometimes seeing, this might be a totally separate conversation, but sometimes seeing that the things we expect from children, if we said those things or expected those things from adults, would that be fair? A lot of the time the answer is no. And so I try to consider that before I talk to my son. I understand that he's 3.5 and that I'm the adult. I get that. There's, sometimes you gotta, change your expectations. However, I mean, kids deserve respect, and he's a human, so deserves my respect. So if I understand that he doesn't like certain things, I mean, I'm not going to do them. If that makes any sense.
Mhm. Yeah,
To
and
a degree, obviously. Like if he doesn't want to have a bath, I mean, sometimes you got to be clean, but it's just to be, allowing them to kind of allowing him to digest information before I expect him to do something, I think is really important.
this goes back to the beginning of our dialogue when I asked you about looking at the world through the eyes of your children, and I'm still on the fence about this idea, but I have this feeling that children and adults are not essentially different, in that uh, adults can, to some extent, be like larger sized children, in that our fundamental needs and the needs of children are not that different. We express it in a multitude of different ways, and we find ways to cope, so to speak. But our needs are the same, and in some ways, we like kids require them to be met.
Yep. Our needs are the same. In the grand scheme of things, it's just children have a different way of, well, for example, my daughter, the only way she can describe anything to me is crying at this point, because she's a baby. So when she's crying, like, I have to remember that she's not crying to make anybody upset. She's not necessarily sad. She's just trying to tell me something. And I think that's really just the difference between kids and adults is, obviously children, you don't have a fully formed prefrontal cortex until you're in your 20s, but aside from that, we all have the same kind of needs. We just learn different ways to either meet those needs ourselves or learn how to describe those needs in a better way to other people, as we learn vocal language, body language, all that kind of stuff, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And I also believe that, you can't learn to meet your own needs in terms of, for example, self-soothing and being kind to yourself and taking care of yourself unless somebody teaches you how to do those things. And I think that that's essentially your job as a parent, is to teach your child how to accomplish meeting those needs, whether it's asking or doing it yourself or what have you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, final question, one that I ask every musician who's come on this program. What does music mean to you?
Oh, geez. Everything. Um, I wrote a song a long time ago, and I still have never recorded it. Actually, I think I recorded it once. Well, anyway, doesn't matter. It's called "Left Me with a Song," and the the concept of it basically was I was asked by a partner once who did not enjoy the fact that I got a lot of attention when I would perform. What I would say if they had asked me to stop performing. And essentially I wrote this song saying that, if you have to go, that's fine. But I'm never going to stop playing music. And the hook line is, at least you left me with this song. And there have been plenty of times in my life where I've been left with absolutely nothing but the creativity in my head and the ability to write about it, which for some reason just means so much to me. It's just the way that I am able to express myself, the way I feel, and who I am as a person. And yeah, I guess it's my best friend Jessie has this thing on her wall, and it says, um, "Hold on to the music when there's nothing else to save you," or something like that. And I think that's what music means to me.
Mhm. And by Jesse, you mean, was it Jesse Tremere or Jesse T as her
Yeah,
artist name?
Jesse T.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got to know you from her. She's wonderful.
Yeah, she told me. She messaged me and she said, "I think you would find this conversation with this man fascinating. I'm going to give him your contact." I said, "All right." Jesse's wonderful. She's we've been friends since she was, I think, 15 and I was 17. I'm a couple years older than her. So, yes, we've been friends for a number of years because we're old now. And yeah, she's great.
Yeah, and I'll let her know that you said hi.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. I'm sure I'll talk to her later today. So we'll see, you talk to her first.
Yeah, and I hope that I didn't disappoint. She seems to have hyped me up way too.
No, not at all. This was fascinating. I loved this conversation. This was wonderful. It got my brain going. This was a I need to have more conversations like this with people. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm gonna go back, and I've watched a couple of your interviews with other people, but I'm excited to go back and watch the rest of them.
Thank you. Yeah, the appreciation is likewise. Thank you very much for
Yeah,
joining.
thank you.